Hello and welcome to KennyRoy.com. I'm Kenny Roy. This is the lecture for the month of July 2014. It is rendering your reel. Now, probably figured out what we're going to be talking about. You guessed it. How to apply squash and stretch to a banana. Oh wait, no, that's not right. It's rendering your reel. Right, so why is this important? Or is this important? Let's first address the elephant in the room. Is it becoming the case that an animation reel with just great animation doesn't cut it? And I have to, remove myself a little bit from the, the nostalgic or the feelings that I want to have about the whole process and kind of look at the realities. And I can speak as somebody who hires animators from time to time, that there is a unavoidable effect that rendering your demo reel shots nicely will have on a viewer, and that's just the long and the short of it. And at the very least, I'm going to show you just a few things that you can do with Viewport 2.0 that will hopefully make some things even for those of you who don't have the time or don't want to fully render your reel, ways that you can do playblasts that are a little bit nicer. And we'll go through that. So this is going to be a slightly technical Maya lecture this month, but I do think that for the amount of time that you'll have to spend kind of learning this stuff, and for the potential for it to be the difference between getting hired or not, it's kind of it's a pretty good deal. It's a pretty fair exchange, a fair deal to go with. Okay, I will say this. There was such a time when basically I started that I remember getting down the demo reels that were on the bookcase of my boss and watching some of them. I had permission. I didn't just like sneak into his office and look at all these demo reels. And these were demo reels on VHS. And I remember there actually was a demo reel that had a chrome unicorn running on a checkerboard. So if you remember the good old chrome sphere or chrome horse on a checkerboard, this was one of those reels, and this was a person that was working. So it was that was a long time ago now, but the point I'm trying to make is that that person was kind of ahead of his time in terms of the technical skill, and this person got a job as an animator. Maybe the pendulum is swinging back just a little bit on that kind of issue. Okay, where's my thing? Here's my thing. Can't do this without my PVC pipe. Okay, that I gotta stand on. Stretch out my feet. Oh, it feels good. Okay, so how are we gonna do this? How are we gonna get this done? I will show you. So I've brought up a shot, an old shot. Okay, but let's just pretend that this was, this is going on my my demo reel. It's a flour sack shot where the character is jumping and trying to get over the wall here and doesn't end up making it. So I'm going to say that this is going to go on my demo reel. Okay. Now, you all know probably about how to place a key light, right? A fill light, a rim light, and a background light. Okay. Now, what are those? All right. I'm going to diagram this out just a little bit. Okay. Your key light, here's your subject. Your key light is the light that is most directly illuminating your subject. Okay, it is the one that casts the harshest shadow, and if you had no other way to describe it, and you were looking at like a photograph or whatever, you would call it the light. Okay, so that's what that is. Your fill light is wherever there are shadows. You'll probably, where there are the darkest shadows, you'll probably want to create a light that fills in. And that's why it's called a fill. It fills in those shadowy areas. Okay. Also in the shadow areas, it's easier to do when you don't have something that's like your camera's not looking at it straight on. But you'll also have a light that is from behind that is defining the edge. Okay, so sort of the glancing light off of the edge here will make the rim, that's why it's called a rim, sort of start to glow or be illuminated. Okay, and then you have a background light, whatever the subject is in front of. If the background is being lit only with the key light, then you're going to get sort of like a flashlight effect. And you'll want a background light that is lighting that thing. Okay. Now, again, this is the normal studio setup, but it's applicable in Maya and it's applicable in photography and painting. Really, all visual mediums uses this kind of setup as a basis, as a foundation, an easy place to start. Okay, so let's simplify really quickly though, and start just by talking about those lighting directions. Okay, so I'm going to create a light. You want to use spotlights. The reason why you want to use spotlights is because the shadows are more predictable, they are less render intensive, and you can move them around like cameras. I like to create my lights and then go panel, look through, selected. And then it's easy, especially if you have like more than one subject. Let me just sort of like figure out what I'm looking at here. It's easy to frame up this object here. Okay. So that's going to be my key light, and as you can see, it's pretty boring, and there's not really much going on. Okay, we're going to go very, very, very simple here. Okay, all right. So I'm going to turn just simple shadow mapped shadows on this light. It's not a, this is not the shadow part of the tutorial yet. I'm just doing this for effect. So I'm just turning those on. Disregard, everything else that's going on. I'm going to show you the light as we have it. Okay. So this object, let me pan around here so we get a little bit more of a view of what's going on. So this object has here's the alpha, right? So here is the object, and it's got no light filling in on the other side. So we're going to create another light, another spotlight, and we're going to look through selected. And since this spotlight is also illuminating, it's basically it's a little bit hard to figure out how we're supposed to illuminate this and what angle we're supposed to illuminate this. Okay, so you actually have to open up another perspective and hit the 7 key on the perspective. There we go, and then move around and try to find the angle that most naturally kind of just starts to fill in those shadows. Okay. And so it's not going to be totally opposite. If it was totally opposite, I would do this, right? It's not totally opposite. It's sort of a little bit an off angle to that. Then you want to bring down the intensity. Okay, so I'm going to make the intensity like 0.5. All right. Oops. Sorry about that. We're going to make it 0.5. And then we're going to let's just take a quick look at that. I like to, in my render view, go to options and turn on auto render region. That way, when I just drag a box, it automatically re-renders it. Okay, and I think that that's a little bit probably too hot. All right, so I'm also going to turn this down just a little bit. Now, there's something called IPR, which I don't think is valuable for us to get into right now. I think we should try to focus down on just the things that you'll need in order to get something working. So I like that. Okay, I think that that's probably pretty attractive. You can see the periphery, you can see the object. There's a little bit of fill on there, and it's looking pretty good. Now we're going to create another light. Now again, I have to do this pretty quickly because there is so much to go over, but what this is, you should probably be naming your lights as you make them so that you don't get a little bit out of control. This is the rim light. Now the rim light is sometimes even more powerful than the key light. I'm just going to render from there and see what we're getting. You want to choose an angle where the rim light is basically just showing up and just kind of hugging that edge and defining that edge. And let's look in the shadow down here too. All right, so I want to kind of come down a little bit. Okay, something like that. And now I'm going to play with the intensity of this because I actually like a hot rim light. I like a very hot rim light. I think it looks really, really super special. Okay. Let's come back again. Render. You can right click on these and you can render a new you can render choosing the camera that you want to use. I want this to be just a nice narrow thin rim, and I'm just moving back and forth on this and finding the right range. I want it to be underneath but not totally underneath, not like that, not that much. Okay, I want it to be just a little bit higher. Okay. All right. And that might be a little too hot, so 1.5 would probably be just a little bit better. Okay. So here we have, oops, it's almost being covered by my head. That was close. So here we have basically that 3-light setup, key, fill, and rim. Okay. And with a emphasis on really defining the shape, keeping the sort of the integrity of the shape, and featuring that. And why is that important? Well, if you're an animator and you're working really, really hard on these really gorgeous poses, and you render, God forbid, you render your gray shaded model on a gray background in your playblast, then a lot of your posing is going to get lost, isn't it? So to the purists who think that, and I sort of know where you're coming from, but to the purists who feel that, an animator should only get a job based on, your animation skills alone, to them I would say, well, a certain amount of control over the posing has to do with how it's reacting to the natural world. And yes, a lighter will probably make your amazing animation work if you're working on a feature film. On the very other end of the spectrum, where you're turning in playblasts to try to get a job, you're disregarding how your posing is going to react to the natural world entirely. So I think experimenting at least a little bit with lights is a good exercise for any animator. Even if you're completely disinterested in lighting or any of the generalist tasks. Even if that's the case. Okay, I'm just going to pop an Altoid. My throat's getting dry. Throat's getting dry, folks. Okay. So, and then if we had a background, we would light the background with a background light. So that brings us sort of to the first slightly technical aspect of this, which is that if I add a background, okay, and so I'm going to go back, I'm going to make this my perspective view. Okay, so if I add a background to this and we just render it, the shadows from my lights are going to be all like wacky, right? I'm getting this one right here, and basically because the lights are being partially blocked and this one's being completely blocked by this, I'm not really getting the lighting that I wanted. And for the most part, I'm going to want my key light to do most of the shadow casting. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. First thing we're going to do is we're going to adjust the angle of this light so that the background is lit a little bit more evenly, and the ball is casting a nicer shadow. Okay, so this is what we're going to do. It's advantageous to turn on high quality rendering so that you get the much more high quality shadow, or sorry, the cone of the light cast on your scene. Then what you want to start adjusting is this thing called penumbra angle. And what that basically does is adjust the softness, basically, of the light that you've created, okay? So I'm going to increase the cone, and the penumbra angle, I'm going to bring it down so that it has nice even fall off, okay? Oops, forgot to switch back. My bad. Anyway, so here we are. I created this box, okay? And here's the background that I created. I just deleted 3 faces off the box, and then I went up to renderer, high quality rendering. All right, you don't have to touch the options just yet, okay? And then, well, let me turn it. So here's default quality. You can't really see anything. Let me turn my penumbra back up. And then you go to high quality, and then you can actually see something. So I brought my penumbra down. I adjusted the cone angle so the whole background is getting kind of even light. Okay. Now I don't want the background to get these lights. I want these lights to only affect the sphere. Okay. Even though it's not super realistic at all, I am lighting this for maximum effect. When you're lighting your demo reel, you're going to be lighting it for maximum effect. Okay. So we're going to remove this object from these lights, and what that will do is make it so that, for instance, there won't be a shadow, like a weird shadow cast on this wall, and the rim light won't be completely blocked. Okay, so this is how we do that. Go up to your window, and then relationship editors, and then light linking, light centric. I'm going to rename this one just because it's time to. This was my fill. This was my rim. Okay. So I only want my key to be touching P cube 1. So on my fill, I'm just going to deselect it, and on my rim, I'm going to deselect it. Now, you'll see that it removed it from being illuminated. I believe that's only in high quality rendering. I'm not sure though. Okay. I'm not sure. Next thing we're going to do is we want to increase the fidelity of those shadows. Now there's two ways to do this. One with depth map shadows, one is with ray trace shadows. For most purposes, depth map shadows will be perfectly fine. The way you want to get the highest quality out of them though is you want to increase the resolution to something like 1600. But then change the filter size to a high value. What that will do is that will give you a large soft shadow instead of a really crisp narrow shadow. Okay, so I'm going to make the filter size something like 8. All right, and then if I render this now, the background should be getting nice even light. Here's the before. Oh yeah, fall in love with this button, by the way. This one saves your render so that you can compare the two. Okay, so here is my background before with no penumbra angle, as well as a shadow being cast from my fill light and the rim being completely gone. We go from that to this. Okay, so a very big difference. Okay, now you could say, again, you could say a lot about this, that it's obviously not purely a accurate render, or not purely a render that's going to raise any eyebrows, but the fact is that we've made a couple choices is actually getting us to think a little bit more like cinematographers, or a little bit more like directors even. There's a lot that a director has to keep in mind as they are working on a film. And your job is just to sit down. Sorry, this is a fire engine I've never heard so close to my building. Your job is to just sit down and finish shots and create, beautiful movement. And your director comes along and sort of like, embellishes and helps those things out and changes them around and does a whole lot of awesome stuff to it. But really, at the end of the day, you're both working together, and you thinking about these things, or at least having a little bit of experience with these things, can't hurt. Okay, I'm going to turn the filter size down to like 5, because that will sharpen up these shadows under here. And I'm just going to see what this looks like now. Yeah, that looks a little bit better. Anyway, so here's 8 and here's 5. All right, the other way to do this is with ray trace shadows. Now you're not going to get, you can actually show your shadows. So if you go into lighting and you turn on shadows, this only works in high quality rendering. In default quality rendering, oh, actually it does work. Yay! I guess this is maybe 2014. I didn't know that actually worked. But it gives you a very inaccurate preview of your shadows. And if I'm not mistaken, maybe they changed this too. Does that work? Yeah, if I'm not mistaken, you can only get a sense of the softness of a shadow by adjusting the resolution in on the depth map shadow. Now let me see something right here. I was pretty sure that it gave you something a little bit better than that. I guess not. You can go up to viewport 2.0, and viewport 2.0 is obviously a lot better as well. It doesn't. I don't think filter size affects it though, does it? Doesn't look like it. Okay, so you can get the positioning, and you can get the sort of like the height and the range, and sort of like where your shadows are in viewport 2.0, but it's not really good for previewing the softness. But let's jump down to ray trace shadows. Your light radius. How do you pick the right light radius? Well, your light radius is basically how much area is being covered by your light. I have a video light up there. And you can probably see it in the reflection like of my phone right here. Let's see here. You see that? It's actually a very big light. Okay? It's about 2.5 feet across and about, I don't know, 18 inches tall. Okay? So it's a big light. See how it's casting extremely soft shadows on me? But also see how if I touch right here, there's a very sharp shadow. I'll do it like this. There's a very sharp shadow. How can I do it so that you'll see it nicely? I don't know how to do this. How do I aim it? I'm having like a really dumb moment right now. Okay, let's just do this. So you see how the closer it is to my body, the sharper the shadow is. Why is that? That's because the closer it is, the more the entire area of that light is being blocked by the object. Okay, imagine you're down on the surface of my shirt right now and this big thing is coming towards you and blocking the light, right? The closer it is, the bigger it seems to you, right? That means the closer it is, the more of that area is being blocked, okay? So if you look at this, you know, it's very, very, very light up here, the shadow, and as it gets closer to me, it gets darker and darker and sharper. That's what the ray trace shadows are going to give you, okay, in a nutshell. Now, if I want to recreate a light that is sort of this wide, I need a large light radius, but I also should turn up the shadow rays. What is a large light radius? How do I know how big it is? Well, the light radius is based on these units. So what would be a nice wide light? I think probably about 10 units would be a nice wide light. So let's do that. Light radius of 10, and I'm going to turn my shadow rays up to 20. Okay? Now, as you can see, it gave us a nice soft shadow. However, and the nice thing is that there's a little bit of focus on that. However, it's pretty grainy. Now, in as little explanation as possible, I should say that the fidelity of your shadows is based on sampling, which means that how many times is it going to go over the same pixel. It's a basic way of talking about it, okay? So I'm going to go into sampling, and I'm going to turn up my quality to 1, okay? And I'm going to go, and min samples of 1 and max samples of 100 is pretty good, okay? So we're going to see if that makes any difference. I'm going to save it right here, and I'm going to render again, okay? Now what that did is, before, I'm not sure if you can really actually see that back there, but before what it did is a sample quality of 0.25 means that there is basically a quarter of the sampling going on as when it is at 1, okay? Now we're also going to turn up the min samples. Max samples, I don't think you need to turn up, but we're going to turn up the min samples to 4. And what this is effectively going to do is make it so that there is 4 times as many samples per pixel as when we first rendered it, okay? So we turned the quality up, which turns up the amount of sampling. We turned up the number of times it samples, and now we're getting a lot more of a smooth result down there. Play around with those settings, but be forewarned, they do get a little bit out of control a little quickly, okay? Now, this is all well and good when you can control the way that your character is kind of moving, and when they're in, you know, kind of a studio setup. I mean, I'm not sure what else to call this other than a studio setup. It's got like walls on either side. When you are rendering your reel, though, there are probably, you know, your characters are probably going to be moving through some things and doing a lot of, like, you know, interesting, crazy actions. And there might be a point at which you want to just bite the bullet and turn on some of the automatic lighting tools that, for lack of a better word, actually increase the, you know, sort of quality of the look that you're getting. And those are, simply put, final gathering, which basically takes the light and lets the light bounce off of surfaces and affect other surfaces based on the color of the surface. So if it's a gray floor like we have here, the light will come down and bounce off, and it will be reduced in power, but it will illuminate stuff around it. If it is a blue floor, the light will hit it, it will be reduced in power, but it also will reflect blue light, and it'll color the things around it. So I'm going to do a little experiment here, okay? So I'm going to keep this image, all right? I'm going to remove the fill light, okay? So I'm going to delete it, all right? And then in indirect lighting, so I'm going to do one image. So this one is my faked image with the fake fill, okay? And I'm going to do an image with final gathering turned on now, and you will see that the light actually is filled in now. I'm still getting that fill even though the fill light was turned off. Okay, final gathering, I also should note, adds a lot of render time, but here's why. It actually is going to smooth out everything. It's going to smooth out your ray trace shadows. It's going to smooth out the lighting on everything. Why? Because it adds an extra layer of sampling on all of the pixels. All right, so it's almost as if you're drawing your image and then you are doing your final gathering and the entire thing gets smoothed out again. So all of the shadows, even the ray trace and whatever, are going to be smoother. I mean, when I'm looking at this, I just see a lot more smoothness in it. Anyway, so here's the one with the faked rim light, and here's the one with the final gathered rim light, okay? Or not rim light, I'm sorry, fill light. So what's happening is the light is coming down, it's bouncing off of these walls, and it's filling in the shadows down here, okay? Do you see that? All right, now if I turn final gathering off, all right, I'm going to save this image, I'm going to render it again, we're going to see that everything is, again, a lot starker, and it's not as smooth. Like already you can kind of tell there's a little bit of banding in here, and that banding is staying there, and it's so persistent because of the fact that there's no final gathering. Anyway, so look how the fill light fills in the area down here. It's much darker in the other one. Okay. Now I have a trick for doing this that kind of is kind of cool, and I'll show you that in a second. But I'm going to undelete my rim light, and or should I? What should I do? What should I do? I'll tell you what. We'll switch over to that flower sack scene that I was talking about, and we will go from there. Okay, I'm going to turn on final gathering on this one, and I'm just going to quickly save it to the vault. Standby and standby. So let's switch back to this animation, okay? Here's a good time for a segue. So when I was talking about if you don't want to do this, or you don't have time to do this, or for whatever reason you can't render your shots, then you should at least know the good playblast settings to use. So I'm going to really quickly set up. Does this have a camera? Cool. Okay, so I'm going to really quickly set up the lighting in this to be a little bit better. I think we have one spotlight. Let me see. Yeah, we have one spotlight right now. Okay, so I'm going to look through selected. I'm going to make this, I'm going to hit 7 on this. I'm going to go viewport 2.0. Okay, so as you can see, the spotlight has no penumbra angle, so let's soften that up a little bit. We back it out so that the entire scene is lit nicely. And we're just getting, it's almost like a little bit of vignetting that we're getting. I always like that look. I put it into everything I can, actually. And then we already have ray trace shadows with a large light radius of 50, shadow rays of 20. That's good. Okay. And now, if I turned on Final Gathering right now, I would get a lot of color from this blue wall. But in order to control the amount of bounce that I'm getting from the environment around him, I might not want this gigantic blue wall to be really affecting his color all that much. I don't know. Maybe you do. So what you're going to do is, I suggest that you always create your own bounce objects. And you'll see why in just a second. It's very, very, very cool. So select the objects of your background or anything that you don't want to bounce light, and this will actually save you a lot of time on calculation as well. Okay? Go to Render Stats, and then where it says Mental Ray, expand it. Actually, is that under? No, it's just under its own tab. Sorry, Mental Ray. Turn off Final Gather, Cast, and Receive. All right? What that will do is it makes it so that it's not included in the calculation. Then you're going to do this. I'm going to make my own object that's not renderable, that is still casting that bounced light back up onto him. Okay? So let me show you how to do that. I just made a plane. Okay? I do this all the time. I just made a plane. I'm going to bring it just up above the ground plane, so close that it's only the computer knows that it's there. Okay, and then I'm going to assign a new material to it. Right click, assign new material, surface shader. Okay, and I'm going to make this, we're just going to start with bright white. That's what we're just going to start with. And then I'm going to click on it again, and in its render stats, I'm going to turn off everything. All right. All right, turn off everything. But even when all of this is turned off, Mental Ray will still include it in the Final Gathering. It's actually kind of cool. Okay, so let me show you what this looks like. Camera 1, I'm actually going to turn this off and show you. Sorry, I forgot to set indirect lighting on. Okay, so it is on. Okay. So here we have our render, okay. Final Gathering off, or sorry, on that thing is not receiving any Final Gather, okay. And now, watch what happens to our flower sack now. You see that? He's lit beautifully. He's got all that nice smoothness on his body now, okay. Okay, so here's what we do. This is obviously too bright, right? So we then select our surface shader, and then we can just turn it up and down however we please. So I'm just going to choose like a spot right there and just adjust it to where I think it's good. How about that? All right. There we go. So now he looks like he's fitting into this, and he looks really, really, really good. Okay. Now, the background itself needs a little bit of love, but this is where I would say that it's more computationally a good idea and just better for control over your scene to add some background light. So I would say that because your background, like if it's like this, it's so big and you're not going to use cast shadows on it, you're just going to basically fill it in, that this is the one time that it's probably a better idea to use a directional light. So I'm going to create a directional light, and I'm going to just bring it up into the scene and scale it so I can kind of see what direction it's actually pointing in. And then I'm going to fill in the background a little bit. Bring the intensity way down, like 0.1, 0.2, something in there. And then I'm going to grab my quality options and turn my quality back up. And let's do min samples 10, I think. Triangle filter. You don't have to really touch most of these things, except shadows. All right. So what this is that if you have a object that is reflecting or refracting, the shadows in those reflections need enough rays to calculate. It's a little bit weird, but if you don't have a lot of shiny objects, you don't have to touch that thing down there. And let's actually turn these shadow rays from 20 to not my directional light. Where was it? Oops. My spotlight to like. Oops, that's not right. There, 40. Anyway, so here is our old shot with no fill on the environment, no, nothing really going for it. And now here is the new. And one problem, looks like I did accidentally turn on ray trace shadow. Yeah, let me turn that back off. Okay, so now our environment is Jeez. Wow, this has really gotten screwed up. Jeez. Wow. Okay. I'm sorry. I didn't realize that the rendering was actually going to kill my recording software. Anyway, so here we are. So what a drastic improvement. Okay. Let me turn off Final Gathering again and just show you what it looks like. And I won't be talking while this is rendering, so nothing will get screwed up. Okay. All right. Here we go. Okay, all right, so looking specifically at our character, look how nice that final gathered fill effect really comes through. Isn't that really nice? Really, 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 really super cool. Okay, one last thing, and this is kind of a thing that you would do if you can't, I'm not showing you how to render in layers. I'm not showing you how to do anything that's like super complex. But if you can't get your things out in layers, there's one way to add just a little bit more kind of realism to the shadows that you're doing, which is to add ambient occlusion to everything. And the way you do that is you do this. You select all your objects and then open up the hypershade. Okay. In your objects materials, there is a diffuse value. What the diffuse value basically says is how much of the light that is hitting an object is actually being spread out and therefore not reflecting back towards your eye, making the surface darker or lighter. So if you turn it down or up, you can see that you actually get different brightnesses, darknesses of your color channel. Okay, color and diffuse are not the same thing. Your diffuse power can be, your diffuse value can be mapped, and on every single realistic texture you've seen in every single VFX film you've ever seen, they map the diffuse because different materials, again, have different diffuse values. Okay, a carpet is extremely diffuse, which is funny because extremely diffuse means that it has a super low value. It's the opposite. And a mirror is like not diffuse at all. A mirror is like it perfectly reflects light from that point, and the light is reflected, you know, like 1-to-1. Anyway, we can use this to actually globally lighten or darken the objects based on how close they are to other objects, which is referred to as ambient occlusion. It's basically how much of the sky any part of the object can see. If you've ever seen those renders that are outdoors that feel like, you know, even if it's a simple material, it feels like clay because it's dark in the cracks. That's what ambient occlusion was basically developed to do. Okay, so I like to do this. Open up your Hypershade, go to Mental Ray Textures, click on it, and then go to MIB Ambient Occlusion, all right, and click on it, and it'll make a new one. And then click back on your material and middle mouse drag this onto your diffuse channel, okay? Then go Out Value R, and then click on Diffuse. What this texture will do is, again, it will make it so that all of the material, when it's rendering, it will get dark in the cracks, and it'll be brighter and, you know, where it's you know, visible, okay, or it can like see the light. Okay, this is good. You want this. This is sort of like, this will give everything sort of like an outdoors kind of feeling to it, because it can be very computationally expensive. You want to set a max distance. Okay, you want this thing to only occlude, it's called. You want it to only occlude. Did I just move my camera one? No. All right. You want it to only occlude if it's within a certain distance, okay? So I'm going to go and look at this, and I'm going to say that, okay, so this is 20 units about, all right? So I would say like a max distance of like 50 is plenty, okay? Spread controls basically how focused or spread out the effect is. Okay, a spread of 0.8 is a good default value. I wouldn't change that. Samples, again, is going to turn up. When you turn this up, it's really going to affect render times. 16 samples is way too little. 24 is a good place to start. All right, if you're getting a little bit of flickering or it's like grainy, then go up to 32. There's no reason to ever go above 32. I think 24 is pretty good. Okay, and I would leave everything else exactly the same. Now, you can't, you can create this over and over and over for every single material, or you can use the exact same one for all of them. Okay, so I'm going to actually select a new material, middle mouse drag it onto the diffuse, same thing, Out Value R is diffuse. The set right here, I'm just going to do the same thing on all of these. Okay, now again, this is going to affect the brightness of everything that it touches, and there's a good chance that this is going to be darker than it was before, and so you'll have to adjust the intensity of the rest of your lights when you do this. Okay, select objects. Select objects. Okay, so there's no, those are the only materials I have to do. Now, you notice that the default diffuse value is 0.8. This goes from pure white to pure black. We don't want that because a pure white is a diffuse value of 1. So we want this actually to be 0.8. And then if you want to adjust this up so that your scene is not so dark when you get it, then you can adjust this up. I'm going to adjust this up just a little bit so that we're not getting like total blackness in the cracks. But you know, you don't really know where you should be until you see the scene. All right, so I'm gonna keep this up. All right, now again, I apologize for how much this is going to slow down, but hopefully we will get a pretty quick. I'll turn off final gathering, and I'll also turn down the shadow samples on my light until I'm totally sure. I'm totally sure that I have what I want. Okay, so let me just turn this to like 10. Okay, so let me just quickly first do this render and see if we're getting darkness in the cracks. All right, pretty cool, right? So here's the old, and here's the new. And as you can see, if you look like in the cracks, everything is darker, and also like on his body, you know, as you start like sort of rounding the corners, and final gathering will put a little bit of that light back, but as you start rounding the corners, things get a little darker. I'm going to adjust two things. First thing I'm going to adjust is I don't like how dark it actually gets, and I think it's a little too spread out actually. So let's do that. So I'm going to bring this up. I don't want it to be too dark, but I'm going to spread like 0.5. So it's a little bit tighter to the cracks as well. Okay? Actually make it like, maybe like 0.4. Okay? But I brought the darkness up so that it's not so dark in the cracks. There's one thing that you might need to adjust, and it is one thing that is a little bit difficult to make work, but I'm going to try to do it in front of you. And if it doesn't work, there's another way around it. If you see where this plane is making a cut in the render, right? Even though it's invisible, it's being rendered into the scene, okay, due to the final gathering. In fact, here's where you can kind of like just straight up test your ambient occlusion. Here's where you can straight up test it. See, this is the darkness that you're getting, and here's like the fall off, right, with that spread value. So I wanted it about, you know, 50% lighter and a little bit tighter to where those intersections are happening. So this is actually kind of cool that it's there. All right, so this is what we have to do, and I hope this works. You have to add an attribute called MI label, okay? And I'm going to type in MI and then uppercase LABEL, and I'm going to make it integer, and I'm going to make the default, make it 5. Oops, MI label. Override nice name. And I want the nice name to be the exact same thing as the real name. Okay? So they both are the same. Alright, I'm gonna hit add. Now with an MI label, what this attribute does is it allows the ambient occlusion texture to include or exclude different materials. Okay, and here they are. ID include and exclude. Okay, so including means that you would put the label that you just chose into here. Excluding would mean that you put the negative number. So I do not want -5, or I do not want 5, so I'm putting -5 in there. Non-self means that an object or a material will not ambient occlude itself. So I'm an object, and as I bring this here, yes, this is a shadow, but this is almost sort of like ambient occlusion. Ambient occlusion sort of imagines that the entire sky is a light, or your entire scene is a light, and whatever gets covered is going to get darker, or whatever there's an intersection, it's going to get darker towards that crack. Okay, so non-self would mean that one object can't occlude itself. Okay, so I'm going to leave that alone. All right, so hopefully that worked. Let me just test it really quick. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so that object is no longer occluding itself. Let me look down here. Okay, see how it's a lot tighter to the crack? Let me just darken it up just a tiny bit more and make my spread just a tiny bit tighter. You see right here. There we go. See that nice little bit of darkening in the crack there? Here's before, here's after. Before, after. Look just right here. Before, after. Very subtle, very nice though. Okay, we're going to do one final render, and I apologize that this is going to, choke and kill my computer, but I'm going to turn Final Gathering back on. I'm also going to take my spotlight. I don't think we need 50 rays, but let's do 30. Okay, and this will be the last render that I do, and hopefully all of this will work together. Just have to wait a minute. I'm not sure if you can hear what I'm saying. I don't think that my microphone dies when it renders, just my webcam. But hopefully you can see this and see the render happening and hear my voice. Very cool, right? Very cool. In fact, he's getting some shading on his body, not because that there is a light, not just because there's a light right there, but because this form is actually sort of occluding the sky from over here. We get that really nice occlusion right there. Everything is looking really, really, really cool. So if we go back to our very first version, I don't really have one that has everything removed, but at any rate, now we have that pretty soft, pretty nice looking render, I would say. All right, let's finish up by talking about what to turn on in Viewport 2.0 if you're just going to make playblasts. Okay. So first thing is you definitely would want to remove the ambient occlusion. So I'm just going to delete that. It'll take us back. You want to, in your display options, under heads up display, turn off everything here. You want to probably show just polygons. You want to turn on your shadows, and then go to Viewport 2.0 and go to your options. The two things that are going to make it look kind of cool are motion blur and anti-aliasing. Okay, motion blur normally only works on transform. In fact, yeah, it looks like it only works on transforms here. The problem with that is that you're not really going to get any motion blur on a deformed character. You're only going to get it on things like things that are actually transformed. So that kind of stinks for characters that are deforming. I wonder if you do an alembic cache. Let me see. I'm going to do experiment right now. I don't know if it's going to work. Let me just see. Whole frame geo. I wonder if that would work. World space. Let's try that. I don't know what's going to happen. If I import this and all of a sudden it's import alembic, merge, import, and it works, I mean, that would be really dope, wouldn't it? No. Yeah, unfortunately, it doesn't work. You still might want to turn motion blur on anyway, just for the things like if you have them like throw a prop or something like that. Like the prop is transforming, so motion blur will apply, and that's great because your prop is not going to be, strobing or something. You have someone like throwing a ball, like that's a perfect thing to enable motion blur for. So that's not really going to work. The screen space ambient occlusion is just like the ambient occlusion that I just talked about, except it uses the video card. You can turn up or down and see how it's putting darkness in the cracks, right? And then you can change the radius, which is basically the spread value in the ambient occlusion, and then the filter radius, which is kind of the sharpness of it. If you turn up the samples to like 32, you might be able to get some pretty decent results with this. Anyway, but then anti-aliasing. Turn on line and multi-sample anti-aliasing and turn it all the way up. This is how you're going to get the best look in your playblast, okay? Then make sure over lighting you turn shadows on. And my shadows, you may have better luck switching these over to shadow mapped and just playing with the resolution right here, make it nice and sharp, not too sharp because then the filter size won't affect it, and then turning the filter size up. Let's try like 10. Something maybe just a little bit soft like that. Adjusting the shadow color maybe will make it look a little bit better as well. I'm going to hide this. I don't need that plane there anymore. I'm going to turn off the grid. All right, and here you have probably the best looking. Oh, he's going through the ground for some reason. That's weird. That's weird. Anyway, just forget him going to the ground. I don't know why that's happening. Oh, it was the alembic cache. Yeah, forget that too. This is probably the best looking playblast that you could ever get, is with all these settings turned on. Okay, I think making the shadow only half opaque also made a big difference. Okay. So if this was how you wanted to turn in your playblast, this would probably be a good starting point, okay? But I hope you take into consideration everything that we went over to get that really sweet render, going all the way back through the final gathering, the bounce plane, ambient occlusion, and then here faking the ambient or the final gathering with a rim and a fill light, enabling it, ray trace shadows, sample size, and light linking. Remember, using only the lights that you want to illuminate an object by going through that relationship editor and using the light linking. Okay, so at the very minimum, now you should be, after watching this, be able to render your demo reels at a level that I have to say, now that we're done this, I pretty much am not looking at anyone's demo reel unless they're up to that level. And I hate to be the guy to break it to you now, but especially as a small studio, and because there are 100 times more small studios than there are like Pixar's and DreamWorks and Disney's, if you are sending out a reel that is just like clunky gray boxes on the default Maya background, you're not getting the looks you deserve. Okay, as a small studio, I look at the ones that are rendered nicely more because it's so much more cost effective for me to hire people who can wear a few hats. But even if you're not planning on working at a boutique like mine, there's still that quality of an animator that knows how a figure like moves and picks up the light. And if you've ever watched like a modeling show like America's Next Top Model or whatever, you know that there is a skill for a model to find the light and to know, like if the camera's right there, as I turn, like my nose looks really big, like right here. So I know this angle between me and the light and the camera, and then it starts to look, normal again or whatever. I'm just making this up. I don't think my nose looks big. It looks fine. Jeez. Anyway, but they know everything about their face. So they know when like the person's about to take a camera and they tilt and they find that just that perfect, they find the light, it's reflecting, they have all their shapes and whatever, and they know exactly how to like smile or whatever it is. That is an extreme example of the kind of awareness I'm talking about, but there's still that awareness that you need as an animator. We have to do more and more. Unfortunately, there is a minimum level of like film knowledge and cinematography knowledge and directing knowledge and storytelling knowledge and whatever to become a professional animator, and that bar is constantly, that minimum is always going up, slowly but surely. So I want you guys to get that job. I want you guys to get that gig. It's like real estate. Once you're in the industry, it's a lot easier to stay in. All right, because you start getting more and more experience, and then your resume reads like a list of successful projects, and not all the animation that you've tried to do on your own in your education and hasn't been up to snuff yet. Okay, so I want you guys to get the job. I hope that this helps. Maybe this will be the thing that kind of pushes your reel, or maybe gets your reel the look it deserves, the second look from the recruiter, whatever. Okay? I appreciate you guys hanging in there. I know this is a lot of tech stuff, a lot of fat to chew this month, but at a certain point I had to bite the bullet and give you this one. Okay? So I hope you enjoyed that. Take care. Good luck with your animation. As always, rock on.